Hi, hello, everyone. I hope I am audible and you can see me and hear me all right. Joined just a little early. We'll wait for a couple of minutes to start with the live stream uh, for community members to join in. And firstly, thank you so much, everyone who's sort of taken out the time, to join us for the second edition of Founders Hours. We had tremendous feedback for the last live stream that we did, right? And in fact, so many questions. Even, I mean, of course, while we were sort of conducting the stream, but after it as well, right? And the ideas with today edition is just more of the same and even better, right? Very special month for us here at Public Policy India, as well as Stride, right? We marked 6 years of PPI recently on the 14th of August. I mean, technically it's on the 15th of August. We just marked it a day earlier because of the national holiday on the 15th. We formally launched Stride, our think tank initiative, right? And we sort of convened the National Policy Forum for the first time ever in India, and of course also launched the State of Policy in India report, which is like our first ever knowledge product at Stride, right? Which is like a one of its kind, a survey of like we had more than 18,000 responses in the SPI report, right? On a sort of, and on like an ecosystem view of the broader public policy and impact ecosystem, right? What's working for people, where they're working, what salaries, what skills, what's not working for them, how can we retain talent better in the sector, even within policy, like across different sectors, say healthcare, education, technology, sustainability, etc., right? And of course, young people in policy, right? So youth in policy. Again, what's working for them and what's not, right? And what can we do better as different stakeholders within the ecosystem, right? So a very different sort of a lens and view on the ecosystem itself. So that's also something we sort of released the report itself, and you'll find a lot of it on PPI and Stride socials very soon and on the website as well, right? We're just uploading it as we speak, right? Get it live. So yeah, that was about the 14th, very recent sort of big day for us, right? All four sort of went live and sort of came online together, right? Without further ado, then let me just quickly get started with the questions that we've received. Very quickly, my name is Yash. I'm the founder of Public Policy India and Stride, right? And we've received a long list of questions for Founder Hours, right? All from our community members, right? So thank you everyone for sort of sharing your questions and thoughts and queries in advance, right, for this additional Founders Hours. And let me get started with the first one very quickly, right? So Pradeep is asking, how can I engage more with policy research and participate in policy making? Very good question, Pradeep. And I'll just sort of explain it in more of a structural way, right? Which is, policy making has 5 pillars, right? And again, you'll find different definitions of these pillars. Like you'll find very similar thing explained using different terminologies and words in different places, right? So I'm not saying this is the way. I'm saying this is a way to sort of look at it, right? And I sort of capture it through ideation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. 5 pillars of policy making, right? Now the question of where you can work in policy, right, at what skills and so on and so forth, right, engage in policy research, right, it kind of boils down to which pillar of policy making are you a part of, right? So for example, and even before that, if we take a step back, right, what do each of these pillars mean, right? So ideation is about how do public agencies, right, and policymakers discover or notice or sort of ideate on a public problem, right, that the society faces, right? Then of course design a policy solution for it, right? I'm oversimplifying everything, by the way, right, but just to get the conceptual basis to your class, right? And then the third pillar of policy making is implementation, right? There's several layers, there's different levels of government in India, right? Different bodies who sort of work on different things, right? And this reminds me of a quote by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She had once said that the only 3 people matter in India: the PM, CM, and DM, right? So we very often forget the DM, the district magistrate, who on whose shoulders very often the policy implementation part of things fall, right? So anyways, so there's a third pillar, right? The fourth is monitoring, and the fifth is evaluation, right? Of course, now around this, there's a lot of things that happen. There's agenda setting. There's different institutions that engage in policy advocacy, etc., right? But the question of where can you work in public policy, in what skills, right? With what skills and what salary, etc., right? It generally boils down to this: that there are 5 pillars to policy making, broadly speaking. And which pillar are you working at, right? Is it ideation, design, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, right? Because each of these pillars, sort of has very different requirements, offers very different career prospects and job opportunities, and even work, requires different skill sets and so on and so forth, right? So again, just to put an example, if you work in policy ideation and design, right, there's a high chance you'll work in the research space, academia, think tanks, etc. Right? That offers a certain kind of life, needs certain skill sets, etc., etc. Is meant for a certain kind of person, right? At the same time, if you wish to work more on the grassroots, right, or with nonprofits in the impact sector, so to speak, right, then there's a high chance you're working policy implementation, right? That again has very different skill sets and affords you different kind of life, right? Then there's monitoring evaluation, which is on the more technical side of policy, of course, and that is where a lot of consulting firms come in and your specialist agencies come in, right? On those pillars, right? So, and just to answer your, just on the final bit of your question, Pradeep, again, to engage with policy research, it'll have to be ideation design as those pillars, right? That's how I would look at it. Again, lots and lots of nuances in different bits, but just as a structural picture, I hope that sort of helps for you to get a sense of it. Next is Aparna. She's asking, what advice would you give an experienced professional looking to pivot into this field from a techno-functional background? Okay, so there's how for any and every sort of job and role, Aparna, there's two things, right? There's a functions and then there's verticals, right? So if your question is that how does someone switch into the policy making space, or transition to policy making, right, from a techno functional or any other role as well, right? One is that you can make use of your function to switch your vertical, right? So for example, again, in your case, Aparna, if your background is in technology, right, and you wish to switch into policy making or transition to policy making, right, you may try and figure out how maybe you can land a technological, an allied sort of a role in a policy firm first, right? To get us, just for you to get a sense of that field. I won't name names, but I know of a consulting firm in India, that has a division that exclusively hires engineers, because they sort of design operating systems for governments and governance, and there's a lot of other similar things, where you can sort of partake, right? Anyways, technology has become a very core part of a lot of public service delivery, etc. So there's a lot of space for someone with your background, Aparna, right? So utilize your function to switch your vertical, right? So switch into policy, right? While sort of having a role similar to what you do currently, right? The other bit is, and I rarely say this, but at least for someone who's looking to transition to policy or has at least more than 3 years of full-time work experience, right? A master's is a good option for you to consider, right? Anything before that, I would not strictly recommend. You're better off just learning on the job and interning and fellowships and so on and so forth, right? Taking that route, right? But anything above that, and of course, for those people transitioning to policy from outside, a master's is a very good sort of option, right? But a proper sort of master's, right? That's what I would say, right? The next question is how to get a job in the policy sector as a doctor with 3+ years of clinical experience and self-taught policy relevant skills. Again, exact same answer, right, that I was giving. That first things first, right? If someone has a clinical medical background, right, that automatically does not mean that they would be a very good fit for public health, right? These are two different skill sets, right? Having said that, of course, you'll have a good sense of the space in general, right? But coming to the question in itself, right? It's very similar to what I shared for Aparna just now, right? That you'll have to figure out how can you utilize your function to switch your vertical, right? You mentioned that you have self-taught policy skills, right? Try and see if you can exhibit those skills. Maybe there might be some people in your networks who might have some connect with a policy org that can put in a word for you, right? Maybe your colleagues, juniors, maybe your peers, right? Maybe a professor, some other practitioners, what have you, right? And your first job will not be something like very senior, very well paying, right? But start off somewhere, maybe even as an apprenticeship sort of a role or a fellowship, right? And then build it up from there, right? Having said that, again, if you're someone senior and looking to transition to policy, again, I would say a proper master's program really helps, right? Zenith is asking, what are essential technical skills that a policymaker should possess, right? And what can be a realistic approach to work with any consultancy or organization, right? On the technical skills bit, right, Zina, here's how I would categorize it. See, again, a lot of it comes down to which pillar of policymaking you're working at, right? So different parts and aspects of policymaking require a whole host of technical skills, right? Right from R, Stata, Python, to on the visualization side, which is say something like a Tableau, right? So to something more on the pure research side, right? And of course, and even subject matter expertise, as we call it, right? While you might strictly not call it technical skill per se, right? But that again is a lot of nuance and knowledge that you need to have, right? On how different fields operate, right? The science and theory behind a lot of things, right? And then again, if you're working in say policy communications, right? As as sort of generic as it might sound, right? People there need very core design skills, right? Or skills on the com side of things in general, right? So on and so forth, right? So it strictly depends on which policy making are you working in, right? And even within the broader policy space and impact space, which sector, right? Gender, healthcare, education, environment, so on and so forth, right? For example, I don't have skills when it comes to data, right? Processing or visualization, maybe a little bit here and there, but broadly not, right? And but I have not required it so far. I can make basic sense of if I'm shared some numbers that I have to make sense of, but broadly that's it, right? But for a lot of other individuals, right, in different kinds of roles within policy, that is the bread and butter, right? So it just boils down to that, right? Then the next question is, Harshit is asking, I've about 2 to 3 years of experience and I'm underpaid. How do I find a decent job? Very good question, Harshit. And I'll sort of answer it on 2 or 3 levels, right? The first is just being some sort of an audit in terms of what are the core skills that you bring to the table, right? And what signals is market giving you, right? Let's just so wherever you're working currently and wherever you worked in the past, right? And I do this exercise with my students a lot, which is just sit with a blank piece of paper, okay, and maybe an empty Google Drive folder, okay, and there just write down every single thing that you've been a part of since grade, I don't know, 11th, okay, and don't consider anything to be small or big, okay, even if it's like an ambient thing, some school captain leadership thing, whatever it is, some project, some partnership, some leadership, some internship, some volunteering, whatever it is that you've done, right? Just write it all down on a piece of paper. No one else is going to read it, okay? So just be very honest, right? And in a Google Drive folder, just upload proofs of those things, So it can be a certificate or a link of an article or a photo or an LOR or degree or what have you, right? And then alongside the existing resume, right, and your current skill sets, and also as well as where do you wish to get to in terms of aspiration, right? Actually feed it to an AI platform or tool of your choice, right? And you'll be shocked at how wonderfully it works because first thing is we often become blind to our own journey. So when you just take out the time, go through your old photos, speak with the parents, whatever it is, right, and write everything down, right, you're often reminded of things that maybe you had an interest in, or skills that you had that you haven't honed or polished in a while, right, just because life has happened, right, or things you had an interest in that you haven't taken up, right, or things you used to work on that you have sort of fall by the wayside, right. And once you feed it to the AI tool with your current professional sort of skill set, resume, and all of it, right, and have a chat that where do you think I might be a best fit for in this sector, any blind spots that I'm missing out on, anything I should pursue, etc., right? It'll be a very fulfilling conversation, I can promise you that, right? Because with that added context, which is new for you as well, right, but which is true about you, right, it just works wonderfully, right? The second bit is that please do a sort of thorough audit and mapping for yourself. In fact, if you go to the PPI website, right, publicpolicy.com, and you can go elsewhere as well, right? I'm just giving this as an example because it's something we have put up recently, right? You'll find a database of some 1,500 organizations, that work in the policy space, right? You can download that, right? You'll find a database of some 250 fellowships you can go for, etc., etc. It's all there, right? Try and download those resources, right? And again, maybe you can do that manually, individually, do it through LinkedIn, do it through AI, whatever, right? Try and map which ones might be the best fit for you, right? Where you might be a very good fit for, right? Map different roles on LinkedIn, and other job sort of listing board profiles, right? And then sort of slowly start making sense of, where do you think you're a very good fit for, right? Over and above where you're currently, right? The one last thing I'll add on this, Harshit, is that also please note that for the first roughly 2, 3, or maybe 4 years of your like full-time working in the policy and impact space, right, the pay is generally low, right? But beyond the 4-year mark, full-time, right, 4-year working mark, it does pick up a lot, right? But yeah, that's what I would add, right? And of course, you can do a mapping of what skills are more in demand in the market today, right? How can you sort of pick up some of those skills, right? Maybe through an internship or something else, right? So yeah, that's what I would say. Nikita is asking, how can I find jobs and internships in this competitive space? I mean, just a self-plug, Nikita, but PPI has a newsletter, where we share hundreds of new jobs and internships every Friday morning. It's all free to access. You can check that out. Newsletter.publicpolicy.com, right? We do have city chapters in India's 25 largest cities, but again, we keep sharing opportunities every day, every hour of the day. In fact, you can find that there. But even beyond PPI, of course, there are a lot of people, individuals on LinkedIn who sort of share jobs boards, once a week. Do check that out, right? There's DevNet, and there are a lot of these other platforms that sort of compile and collate. There's Ground Zero, run by a very good friend, right, MS Mala, you can sort of check out those portals and platforms where they keep hiring, right, and they also serve as talent acquisition agencies, so they might also help you with the placement bit, right. But all I will say is that when I started off in policy, right, even as an intern and just as an interested in 2016, right, it's a very different feel now in terms of just access to knowledge and awareness, right. So I can promise you, if you look at the right places, right, you'll find all those opportunities being delivered to you, right. That's for sure, right. That does not mean that there's no opacity, of course, right. I'm not saying that, but it's way, way, way better, as compared to what it was even 5 years ago, right, in terms of information asymmetry, right. The next question is Pooja. She's asking, why does every policy role require minimum 2 to 3 years of experience? Very good question, Pooja. First things first, as an employer, right, I would suggest that if a role requires anything, say between 0 to 2 years of experience, and if you're a fresher, please apply. Right? Sometimes, those job listings just have that 2 years of experience bar as a filter. Right? If you are, sort of skilled enough and you're a good fit for the role, the organization will consider. Right? And also, it is someone else's job to rule you out. Don't rule yourself out. That also does not mean that you start applying to roles that need 10 years of experience when you have 0 or 1. Right? At the same time, just sort of if you see a 0 to 2 years of filter and you're a fresher or something, you have some internships, right? Please apply. Please do remember fellowships also count for full-time work experience in most places, right? So there's also that. Don't rule that out, right? And finally, even if if you have long-term internships, right? Say like 3 months, 6 months, or even more, right? Those are very solid credentials. Okay, do apply. One thing I cannot add enough, right? And in fact, Ankit, I can see your question in the chat. Thank you for asking, right? For most people in this space, right, one of the best ways to enter policy, right, especially as a fresher, is to pursue fellowships. Again, if you go to publicpolicy.com, you'll find a database of, and this is a new database of, I think, more than 250 fellowships you can consider, in the policy and impact space today, right? Fellowships, most of them are not the best paying, right, but they are aimed squarely at freshers, right? They're very open in that sense. There's a lot of learning, right? Most fellowships have very good branding, recognition, credibility, and all as well, right? Plus, it's fixed term employment, right? So if you do it, say, for 1 year, 2 years, and then you can go on to do bigger, better things, right? So I cannot recommend fellowships enough, right? Secondly, of course, if you can create internships and other similar opportunities for yourself, right? Maybe you can start off with, and I used to do this a lot. I would just figure out 4 or 5 NGOs in my locality, right, and just walk into their office and offer to volunteer. Non-profits are usually resource constrained, right? And they're very happy to have helping hands. Of course, as long as you have some justification, or there's something that that can make them trust you, right? That is usually enough, right? Just so that, because that also counts a legitimate experience, right? Even as an intern, right, or as a volunteer, right? That you work with a non-profit on XYZ things, right? So there are all those ways, in which you can sort of try and figure this out. In fact, you'll see the United Nations, UNICEF in India, they sometimes, in fact, fairly often now, they put out posts on LinkedIn calling for online volunteers, right? Keep an eye for that, right? There are now some very good fellowship programs which are virtual only. You can do it from any part of India, right? There's Citizen for Public Leadership is a good fellowship program. There's many more, right? So I hope that answers your questions in terms of approach to public policy. Okay, Mathre is asking how to transition to international level jobs in the development sector. Two things, Mathre, right? And the first one is, it just kind of saddens me to say this, but I think there are parts and pockets within the broader INGOs sector, right? International NGOs and dev sector in that sense, right? The international dev sector, right? Which are still there, where there's still a sense of information asymmetry. It might not be the most transparent. You might need to sort of know someone to get an introduction, some referrals, so on and so forth, right? Much of the broader policy impact space is truly democratized. Anyone can sort of walk into, come to New Delhi or any other part of the country, in fact, right, and build a career policy, right? The whole INGO space still remains a bit of a black box, right? Not completely, lots of progress, but still, right? So see if you know someone, someone can put in a referral, someone can put in a word, right? Of course, most hiring is, at least in terms of procedure, transparent and online. So of course, you should apply there, right? But the second and more important thing is, right, that again, if you're looking for jobs in the international NGO and development sector, right, I would say that it's the same thing as working anywhere else in India, right? Please just focus on building up credentials, right? I cannot say this enough for everyone watching, and who will watch this later. Please understand, all form of hiring, employment, etc., right, is just a game of credentials, credibility, right? India is a very low trust society, right? Any poor country is a low trust society. In a low trust society, credibility is the most important thing, the sense of trust, right? There's a reason why Indians buy anything and everything that the Tata sell, for example, from salt to steel to specialty chemicals, right? And so when you build credentials, right, people sort of recognize and start to trust you by through the credentials, the brands that you have on your resume. For example, if I came to you for a job, right, you might not know if I have, say, policy advocacy skills or not, right? But you might be like, oh, Yash has worked at Twitter in the parliament, he does speak there, etc. He might have those skills. So you're borrowing trust from the institutions I've been a part of, right? So that's what I would say, that you just focus on building those credentials and credibility for yourself. And there's several ways you can go about it, right? But broadly, there's just two ways of building credentials: the education route and the work experience route, right? What does that mean? Education route means you build credentials through any sort of learning outcomes, right? So it can be, you can pursue a full-time degree, a part-time degree, you can do a diploma, you can do a certificate course, etc., right? And then the second route to build credentials, right? And there are only two routes, right? The second route is through the work experience route, right? So that can be a full-time job, part-time job. You can consult, you can volunteer, you can intern, you can be a fellow, etc., right? Now, given your state of life, right, wherever you might be, financially, personally, in terms of career stage, etc., right, your job is to just figure out which among these credentials can you get for yourself. That's all, right? I hope that this provides an overarching framework for you. And if you want more details on this, you'll find a video on our YouTube itself in which I'm just explaining this and blabbering on this for 30 minutes, right? But that's what I would say. Just try and build those credentials for yourself, right? That is the only game. That's it, right? I can see one more question. User DLX8, sorry, it's a long username, but they are asking, you mentioned find what skills are in the market currently, what should I learn? Okay, good question. So the question is that which skills are relevant in the policy market today, right? There's some skills which are sort of common and relevant across all sectors, no matter where you go. So one is, of course, AI proficiency, right? Very, 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 very critical, right? The most critical skill in the policy space in general forever was, and I think forever will be, communication and soft skills. Ultimately it's a people's business, right? The third thing is, depending on the sector within policy that you're working in, right, you'll need different skills. So for example, so the field of sustainability, I know people who work in parts of, say, carbon credit, on, then the people who work on, say, land rights, the people who are working on labor reforms, the people working on technology policy, right? They need different kinds of skill sets, right? And more than anything else, this, very strong core subject matter understanding or expertise, as we call it, SME, right? So that's how I would sort of approach it. One thing I would say is that even till date, much of the learning is on the job. Okay, so there's that as well. It's not like you need to be fully 100% prepared before you even apply, right? There's just a truth for us to know. What's the next question? Ankit is asking, I did my post-graduation in political science and I've cleared a couple of entrance exams I couldn't join. I want to enter the space. How should I approach this? And is a formal degree required? The same answer, Ankit, what I was sharing earlier, right? That, if you have someone who has, just let's just say spent even 2 to 3 years after your undergrad, right? Either preparing for an exam or working, right? A master is a good option, right? But anytime before that, I would still suggest that, you just learn on the job, try out different things. One common error I see a lot of people make is that they go for a master's immediately after the undergrad. Please don't do that. It's one of the most important decisions you would ever make in your life, right? Please work for at least 1 or 2 years, understand what the field looks like, what works for you, what is not. Even within master's, what do you want to specialize in? Because, now there's an MPP, but there's also an MPH, for example, Master in Public Health, right? There's specialized course in tech policy, etc., right? It's a big investment, not just of money, but also 2 prime years of your life, So that's how I would approach it, right? And the final question is it better to specialize early, say in health, education, tech policy, or stay a generalist? Very good question. One of my favorite ones. I would say early on, okay, there's 2 ways of looking at it, right? If you're someone who generally cares deeply about one particular field, right, one particular issue or subject, right? For example, sustainability, right? Then just specialize in it. That's it, right? Because please remember, people who work in the broader public policy and impact space, right? Of course, we work for a paycheck and to build a career, but also it's more than a vocation for us. It's sometimes an identity, it's sometimes a passion, it's sometimes something we truly and deeply care about, and the outcomes from the work that we do, or the impact from the work we do, right? So if you have that thing identified, just go for the field within policy. Clear cut, right? You need to be happy while doing what you do, right? But on the other hand, if you're open to different things and if you're interested in multiple areas, right, then please sort of, how I like to put it, try out different flavors of ice cream before you buy one, right? The best time to do that is during university and college, right? So it can be doing undergrad or masters, just try, like, for example, when I was in college, right, I was pursuing journalism. That's the only degree I have, right? I did some 6 to 8 internships, each in different field, different city, different functions of policy making. And that, at least for me, personally speaking, that was wonderful. It more than telling me what I wanted to do, it told me what all I didn't want to do. Because public policy is everything under the sun, right? So that's something I cannot recommend strongly enough, right? And of course, it will give you credentials as well to do bigger and better things, right? That's all the questions I had. Yes, I can see one more question, which is masters mandatory, or we can upskill side by side to be eligible for public policy space? Depends on the kind of job you're going for, right? For a lot of government roles, young professionals and all, they need a master's, right? But for a lot of other roles, honestly, even if they say they need a master's, if you're good enough as a fit, or in terms of skill set for that role, right? Organizations are very happy to sort of waive it off. A lot of the jobs that I've done, they kind of need a master's, but I didn't have one, and it was fine, right? It's not that sort of common anyway. Sorry, it's not that uncommon anyway. You can sort of give that a try, right? So again, focus on your credentials, right? It's I don't think there's a very high chance that a master will be a core bottleneck, and even if it is, you can always start to pursue something online, just for the checklist, right? Unless you genuinely want that master's experience, in which case you should go for a proper degree without a doubt, right? That's all the questions I can see, right? Is there anything else that I can answer? I saw a lot of people join at different points of time. No. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I understand it's a Friday evening. You might have better things to do, right? So thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again next month. Third Friday of every month is the rhythm, the schedule that we've set for this, right? And please do keep sharing your questions, engage with the community, and tell us what more we can do at PPI, what we can do better. Do read the State of Policy India report. It'll be live on our website and socials very soon. It's all for you, and it's all from you, right? And yeah, please take care, and I'll see you very soon. Bye. Have a good weekend.